Now is Trey Hardin, former Republican campaign manager and aide to the GOP House leadership, and Democratic strategist Zerlina Maxwell, who both joined us this morning. Trey and Zerlina, welcome. Trey, good morning. Trey, let me start with you. I mean, if this kicks in 23 days, will it be so dire, or will it be the first step to budget reform?
Well, Eric, I think the best thing that can happen for this nation in the long run is that we go over the fiscal cliff. Will it be painful? Yes, very painful. But I think that is a pain. It is only that pain that can hold these elected officials accountable and to act more responsibly. The reality is that I've worked in this town 20 years. Politics still rules the day. That dose of reality, that pain, shutdown of the government services and operations, that type of pain, I think, is the only thing that is going to, in the long run, get these folks in town to actually make sure this doesn't happen again and to act responsibly. And as you said at the kickoff of the show, to really kind of look at some of these government programs and see if they're really necessary.
Well, but you're talking about thousands and thousands of government jobs. You're talking about agencies going out of business, at least, temporarily. And the economists saying if this doesn't kick in, we could go into a recession.
Well, it's time for some bad-tasting medicine for this nation. And, the election is over, but you have a president that thinks he's got the moral high ground on, as a result of the election on the tax issue. And you've got Republicans that have an identity crisis and are ignorant to that fact. We need to lock away the extreme wings of both parties and have reasonable people sit down, realize what this pain really is and what it will do, and start solving problems.
Zerlina, do you think this is the medicine that the federal budget needs?
No, I think that Republicans need to concede and allow the tax rates on the top 2% to go up to 39.6%. On November the 6th, Americans voted to have those tax rates go up. That was the difference between Mitt Romney's plan and the president's plan. And so Americans have spoken. And while the House, is still controlled by Republicans, the Senate and the White House are controlled by Democrats. And Republicans need to make concessions in order to allow us not to go off the cliff, because while that won't be the end of the world, we don't want to go off the cliff and have the stock market plummet and taxes go up on middle-class families by over $2,000.
But what do we do about
Eric, let me just respond to that first. First of all, I think it's a shame that Zerlina has come here and wanted to kind of talk politics, because that is the problem. That is the source of the problem. The president didn't get a mandate from this election. Yes, he won the election. He is the president of the United States. But there is no mandate on any particular issue. It was a close election. This country is very divided, but both the Speaker and the President are heavily influenced by the extreme wings of their parties. It's time for politics. It's time for both of them are. I'm saying both parties are. It's time for politics to exit, and the only way that's going to happen is if we go over the cliff and we start feeling that pain.
Right, let's have Zerlina respond to that. I mean, look, Zerlina, the Republicans did keep the House.
Yes, and actually a majority of Americans voted for a Democratic House, but because of gerrymandering, it stayed in control of Republicans. But the bottom line is that polling shows that a majority of Americans would blame Republicans if we went over the cliff. And so maybe Speaker John Boehner needs to get his House in order to not go over the cliff, because he's going to be blamed if that is the end result.
Let's not talk politics for a second. Let's just talk about what all Americans care about. And that's dealing with the spending. I mean, the spending, they would say, is just out of control. Let's take a look at what happened just this past 2 months. In October and November, the deficit, almost $300 billion. We're racking up $4.8 billion a day. They had, what, $30 billion in revenue? But the spending is up like 3 times that much, $87 billion. Zerlina, what do we do? How do we stop the out-of-control spending? How can we get a $16 trillion budget deficit under control? Will we ever be able to do that for our children and our grandchildren?
Well, I can tell you what we don't do. We don't cut back on Medicare benefits and Social Security benefits that actually impact middle class and working families. We start with the rich. That's what Americans voters wanted. And they don't want middle class families like my own family. They don't want to see their taxes go up by $2,200 after January 1. They want to keep the tax deductions that they have and allow for people that can afford it to pay down some of this debt and deficit.
All right, Trey. Trey, last word. I mean, how do we?
Eric,
we got to pay this down. How do we pay this down?
Exactly. And Eric, what you're hearing is very unfortunate because you asked her a specific question about cutting government spending, wasteful spending. Democrats will not talk about it. She won't talk about it right now.
Well, let's not attack her. That's not my question. How do we stop it?
What's that?
How do we stop the spending?
How we stop the spending is to go over the cliff and have a dose of reality and feel the pain here. It's the only way that's going to happen. I'm telling you. The American people should have zero confidence in these elected officials actually solving problems until there's real pain. All right.
Well, that'll be the last word. Trey and Zerlina, thanks so much for certainly facing it. And speaking of zero confidence in elected officials,